These are 20 hidden facts about Sam Peckinpah's The Wild Bunch, ranked number 80 on the American Film Institute's 100 Greatest American Films, that reveal how a troubled production in the Mexican desert changed cinema forever. Those of you who sat in theaters back in 1969 watching this revisionist Western shock audiences know this isn't just another cowboy movie. And if you've discovered it since, you've learned the same truth. This is the film that killed the myth of the Old West and gave birth to modern action cinema. What you're about to hear is the story behind 3,643 editorial cuts that transformed filmmaking. A story where everything that could go wrong did go wrong, where stars threatened to beat up their director, where live ammunition ended up in prop belts, and where cinematographer Lucien Ballard's revolutionary camera work sat unused for months until one day before it had to be returned. Fact number 1. The role of Pike Bishop was supposed to go to Lee Marvin, until a musical changed everything. William Holden's career-defining performance as Pike Bishop almost never happened because Lee Marvin had already accepted the role. Peckinpah wanted Marvin from the start, and everything was moving forward, until Marvin received an offer that was impossible to refuse. $1 million to star in Paint Your Wagon, which translates to nearly $8 million in today's money just for singing in a musical. Marvin's agent, Meyer Mishkin, was reportedly never enthusiastic about his star appearing in what he called such a nihilistic Western anyway, so the musical gave him the perfect exit. What most people don't know is that before Lee Marvin left the project, he contributed one of the film's most memorable visual ideas. During script discussions with Peckinpah and co-screenwriter Walon Green, Marvin suggested that the gang enter the town of Starbuck, disguised as United States Army soldiers, and his exact reasoning was brilliant. Since you're setting it in a different era from most Westerns, why don't you really go there? Why don't you have these guys come into town looking like Pershing's troops along the border, dressed as doughboys? That image of outlaws dressed as the US military marching into town became one of the film's most memorable sequences, which means every time you see that opening, you're watching Lee Marvin's idea brought to life by William Holden. Fact number 2. The cast that almost was reads like a who's who of Hollywood legends. When Marvin left, the scramble to recast Pike Bishop created a fascinating what-if scenario, and the list of actors considered included Sterling Hayden, Charlton Heston, Burt Lancaster, Robert Mitchum, Gregory Peck, and James Stewart. Imagine any of them in that role. Each would have brought something completely different to the character, and the film we know today might not exist. The alternate casting gets even more interesting when you look at the role of Dutch Engstrom, which Ernest Borgnine made his own. Producers considered Charles Bronson, Jim Brown, Steve McQueen, and Sammy Davis Jr. for the part, so picture Steve McQueen in that wine vat scene or Charles Bronson delivering those famous last lines. Robert Blake was the original choice for Angel, but demanded too much money and priced himself out, which meant he missed being part of cinema history over a salary negotiation. Fact number 3. Peckinpah literally paid a Mexican town to stay in the Dark Ages. Finding authentic locations for a film set in 1913 presented serious challenges in 1968, and Peckinpah found the perfect place in Parras de la Fuente, Coahuila, home to the oldest winery in the Americas. The town still looked rustic enough to pass for the Revolutionary period, but there was one problem. Local officials were about to install power lines that would completely destroy the period authenticity. Peckinpah convinced the producers to pay the town an undisclosed sum to delay their electrification plans for 6 months, which meant an entire Mexican town agreed to postpone joining the 20th century just so a movie could look authentic. The production also shot deep in the desert at Hacienda Ciénaga del Carmen, between Torreón and Saltillo, for the Agua Verde sequences where General Mapache, played by legendary Mexican filmmaker Emilio Fernández, holds court. And the dust at these locations was so relentless that they kept a camera mechanic on permanent duty throughout the entire shoot, just to dismantle and clean Lucien Ballard's Panavision cameras to keep them functioning. Fact number 4. They kept a club ready to knock out the special effects supervisor. The bridge explosion sequence is one of the most dangerous stunts ever filmed, using between 50 and 60 sticks of real dynamite coordinated with stuntmen falling from the structure. Joe Canutt, one of the greatest stuntmen in Hollywood history, was deeply concerned about the special effects supervisor Bud Hulbert, whom he considered inexperienced for something this dangerous, so Canutt came up with a solution that sounds like something out of a comedy except it was deadly serious. Canutt instructed screenwriter Gordon T. Dawson to stand directly behind Hulbert holding a club, And if the stuntmen started falling from the bridge before the final explosive charge was properly set, Dawson had orders to knock Hulbert unconscious immediately to prevent him from detonating it early. Picture that scene, professional stuntmen trusting their lives to a screenwriter with a club, ready to cold-cock the effects guy if things went wrong. That's how razor-thin the margin for error was on this production. Fact number 5. 3 major stars threatened to physically assault Peckinpah. Sam Peckinpah's reputation as a difficult, combative director wasn't just Hollywood gossip but documented fact on The Wild Bunch, where 3 of his lead actors separately threatened him with physical violence. William Holden, a consummate professional who'd been making films since the 1930s, reached his breaking point and threatened to walk off the set entirely if Peckinpah continued verbally abusing the crew in his presence. And this wasn't a young hothead making threats, but one of Hollywood's most respected leading men drawing a line. Robert Ryan, playing Deke Thornton, had an even more direct confrontation after spending 10 days in full costume and makeup without filming a single scene and being denied time off to campaign for Robert Kennedy, something deeply important to him. Ryan cornered Peckinpah and told him, "I'll do anything you ask me to do in front of the camera because I'm a professional. But you open your mouth to me off the set, and I'll knock your teeth in." Ernest Borgnine's threat came from a different source of frustration because the dust in the Mexican locations was affecting his breathing so severely that he finally promised to beat the shit out of Peckinpah if he didn't get some relief from the conditions. Peckinpah got his revenge on Ryan in a petty but creative way by freezing the opening credits on several horses' rear ends, just as Ryan's name appeared on screen, after giving close-up glamour shots to both Holden and Borgnine. Fact number 6. The women in the wine vat scene weren't actresses. Remember that memorable scene where Ben Johnson and Warren Oates are frolicking in the wine vats with beautiful women? Actor Ben Johnson revealed years later in interviews that those women weren't actresses at all but prostitutes that Sam Peckinpah hired from a nearby brothel, and Johnson said Peckinpah did this specifically so he could later brag that Warner Brothers had actually paid for prostitutes for his cast. That's the kind of outrageous boundary-pushing move that defined Peckinpah's approach to filmmaking and to life. And if these behind-the-scenes stories are surprising you, make sure to hit that subscribe button because we're just getting started with the wildest facts from this production. Fact number 7. Ernest Borgnine stopped production when he found live ammunition. This is the fact that should send chills down your spine because one morning, Ernest Borgnine was examining his costume's prop ammunition bandoliers before shooting began. And you need to remember that Borgnine wasn't just an actor but a former United States Navy gunner's mate who knew his way around weapons and ammunition. He looked closely at the bandoliers and immediately stopped everything when he discovered the prop ammunition contained real bullets, actual live rounds that Borgnine claimed the filmmakers had planned to use during filming, just to hear the bullets zing for added realism. Think about what that means. They were going to have live ammunition on set during scenes with explosions, squibs, and stunt work, and Borgnine's military training and knowledge of firearms potentially prevented serious injuries or deaths. This wasn't a close call, but a disaster that almost happened. Fact number 8. The most iconic shot in the film was improvised one day before a lens had to be returned. You know the shot I'm talking about. The 4 members of the Wild Bunch walking in slow motion toward their final confrontation with Mapache. Cinema history remembers this moment, but it wasn't in the script. Throughout the entire production in Mexico, there was an expensive Panavision telephoto lens on set worth tens of thousands of dollars, and Warner Brothers only had one. Cinematographer Lucien Ballard and Peckinpah never used it, and the lens just sat there unused while Panavision kept asking when it would be returned. Until finally, one day before the lens had to go back, Peckinpah suddenly knew exactly what he wanted it for. He set up that famous walk, using the telephoto compression to keep everything in sharp focus, as extras, and townspeople passed between the camera and the actors, which meant the lens that had been wasted for the entire shoot created the single most memorable shot in the film. And here's the kicker. The train robbery sequence wasn't in the original script either, so both of these sequences, the walk and the train robbery, were improvised on the same day. Fact number 9. The film had direct connections to the real Mexican Revolution. Peckinpah's attention to historical authenticity went beyond just visual details when he cast Raul Madero, the brother of Francisco Madero, who was the first president installed during the actual Mexican Revolution, as an extra in the film. Paris was Madero's hometown, creating a direct link between the film's fictional revolution and the real historical events. The connection goes even deeper because the locomotive used in the film, National de Mexico No. 650, wasn't just any old train, but was actually in service during the real Mexican Revolution that the film depicts. When you watch those train sequences, you're seeing an actual piece of the history being portrayed. Fact number 10. The final battle required 12 days and 10,000 blood packs to film. The Battle of Bloody Porch, that apocalyptic final shootout, contains approximately 325 editorial cuts in roughly 5 minutes of screen time, and the statistics of what it took to create that sequence are staggering. 12 full days of filming were required, and Ernest Borgnine later recalled that Peckinpah initially didn't even know how to approach shooting it, because Borgnine could see the apprehension on his face. Approximately 10,000 squibs were used throughout the sequence, each one packed with blood and raw meat to simulate flesh being torn apart by bullets, and they had 350 Mexican Army uniforms that had to be constantly patched, washed, and dried between takes because they kept getting destroyed. Stuntman Billy Hart died at least 6 different times during the sequence, wearing different costumes each time so it wouldn't be obvious it was the same person, and one of Borgnine's stunt doubles was a World War II combat veteran who had served under Patton and broke down in tears during filming because the carnage looked too realistic and triggered memories of actual combat he'd experienced decades earlier. Here's a detail that shows Peckinpah's obsessive attention to realism. He noted that blood blackens as it dries, so for all those reused costumes with blood stains, they didn't just wash them but painted the stains black to maintain the authentic look of dried blood. Fact number 11. Peckinpah revolutionized action movie sound by shooting a hole in a wall. Before The Wild Bunch, all Warner Brothers films used identical gunshot sound effects regardless of what type of weapon was being fired. A practice dating back to the 1930s where every gun sounded the same because they just pulled the same sound effect from the library. Peckinpah insisted that each firearm should have its own distinct sound, meaning a pistol should sound different from a rifle, and a machine gun should sound different from both. But his sound effects crew kept bringing him the same old generic gunshot sounds and he kept rejecting them. Peckinpah's exasperation finally reached a breaking point when he grabbed a real revolver and right there on set fired it into a nearby wall. When the gun was empty, he looked at his stunned crew and barked, "That's the effect I want." This seems like a small detail, but it changed action movie audio design forever, and every modern action film owes its gun sound design to Peckinpah's refusal to accept the status quo. Fact number 12. 6 cameras running at 5 different speeds created the death ballad. The technical innovation behind the film's slow-motion violence was unprecedented because Peckinpah and Lucien Ballard deployed 6 cameras simultaneously filming from the same angle, but each camera ran at a different speed, 24 frames per second, 30, 60, 90, and 120 frames per second. This technique was inspired by editor Lou Lombardo's work on a 1967 episode of the television series Felony Squad that featured a slow-motion shooting scene, and Peckinpah saw it and realized he could take the concept to a completely new level, much like Akira Kurosawa had revolutionized action choreography in Seven Samurai, which directly influenced Peckinpah's approach. The statistics of the shoot tell the story. They shot 333,000 feet of film using 1,288 camera setups, which is a shooting ratio of 25:1, meaning they shot 25 times more footage than what ended up in the final cut. The opening massacre sequence initially ran 21 minutes before being edited down to 5 minutes in the finished film. So 21 minutes of footage existed, and they used less than a quarter of it. Fact number 13. 3 major stars were seriously injured during production. The dangers on set weren't limited to the stunt performers because William Holden was accidentally shot in the arm, which was reported in the press on June 27, 1968, and he was also burned by a malfunctioning squib during one of the action sequences. Ernest Borgnine had his hand run over by a wagon, requiring stitches. But here's something even more jaw-dropping. Borgnine actually performed throughout most of the shoot with a broken foot from his previous film The Split, and wore a walking cast hidden by his costume and boots throughout production. Ben Johnson broke his finger on the machine gun during one of the final battle sequences, and these weren't minor bumps and bruises but serious injuries to major stars, any one of which could have shut down production. Fact number 14. The MPAA re-rated the restored version NC-17 in 1993. Here's a bizarre twist in the film's legacy. When Warner Brothers decided to theatrically re-release the restored 145-minute director's cut in 1995, they submitted it to the MPAA for rating and the board gave it an NC-17 rating. What makes this so strange is that the additional footage contained no additional graphic violence whatsoever, just character-building flashback sequences showing Pike's backstory explaining his limp, his guilt over betraying Thornton, and moments of character depth that had been cut from the original. Jack Valenti, president of the MPAA, explained their reasoning. In the last decade, there has been a public outrage about violence. The judgment of the ratings board is that the degree, the intensity, and the persistence of violence in The Wild Bunch is beyond the ken of young children. Cultural standards had shifted so dramatically in the quarter century since the film's release that what barely got an R rating in 1969 was now considered too extreme for anyone under 17, even without any new violent content, and this delayed the theatrical re-release by over a year until Warner Bros. Successfully appealed the decision. Fact number 15. The producer cut 10 minutes without Peckinpah's knowledge. After initial test screenings where outraged viewers filled comment cards with furious complaints, those who hadn't walked out anyway, Peckinpah agreed to trim some of the slower sequences because he understood the film needed some adjustments. Producer Phil Feldman then went behind his back and removed an additional 10 minutes without Peckinpah's consent, after theater owners complained about the film's length affecting how many times they could show it per day. And these were character-building scenes that gave depth to Pike's motivations and the gang's relationships. Multiple versions existed in 1969. A 145-minute European version shown with an intermission, a 143-minute initial American release, and a 135-minute version shortened specifically to allow more daily screenings and maximize revenue. Sam Peckinpah never forgave Phil Feldman for this betrayal, and these scenes remained lost until the 1995 director's cut restoration finally allowed audiences to see the film as Peckinpah originally intended. Fact number 16. Warren Oates chose adventure in Mexico over a safe paycheck in Los Angeles. Warren Oates, who played Lyle Gorch, faced a career choice that reveals everything about why certain actors become legends because he could star and support Your Local Sheriff, which was filming in comfortable Los Angeles, or he could go to the remote Mexican desert with Sam Peckinpah for The Wild Bunch. His wife Teddy remembered his decision. He had done Return of the Seven in Mexico. He got hepatitis plus dysentery, but off he went again with Sam. He loved going on location. He loved the adventure of it. He had great admiration for Sam. Oates knew exactly what he was choosing because he'd already suffered serious illness filming in Mexico before, and he could have taken the easy job, the comfortable job, the safe job, but instead he chose loyalty to Peckinpah and the promise of something special even though it meant risking his health again. Oates had a philosophy about his career that explains this choice perfectly. I'm happy as a character man, and I want to stay a character man. Stardom wasn't what he was chasing. Great work was. Fact number 17. John Wayne privately condemned the film for destroying Western mythology. While critics like Roger Ebert defended the film and Time magazine praised it as a raucous, violent, powerful feat of American filmmaking, calling Holden's performance his best since Stalag 17, not everyone in Hollywood was impressed. John Wayne, the embodiment of the traditional Western hero, privately criticized The Wild Bunch because he felt the film destroyed the myth of the Old West, and to Wayne, Westerns weren't just entertainment, but morality plays about heroism, honor, and the civilizing of a frontier. Peckinpah's revisionist Western showed the West as it really was, brutal, morally ambiguous, and soaked in blood. The irony is rich when you consider that 1969 saw both The Wild Bunch and Wayne's True Grit released, and Wayne won the Best Actor Oscar for playing Rooster Cogburn, the last great traditional Western hero. In the same year, Peckinpah was demolishing everything that character represented. This came just 2 years after Bonnie and Clyde had opened the door for graphic violence in Hollywood films, setting the stage for Peckinpah's even more intense approach. Roger Ebert was present at the film's press premiere in the Bahamas when a Reader's Digest reporter stood up and asked, "Why was this film ever made?" Ebert defended it. "I suppose all of you up there are getting the impression that this film has no defenders. That's not true. A lot of us think The Wild Bunch is a great film." Fact number 18. Peckinpah admitted he could no longer watch his own masterpiece. Despite creating what many consider his masterpiece, Peckinpah's relationship with The Wild Bunch was complicated and painful, and he confessed years later, "When we were actually shooting, we were all repulsed at times. There were nights when we'd finish shooting and I'd say, 'My God,' but I was always back the next morning because I sincerely believed we were achieving something." Then he admitted something that reveals the toll the film took on him. "To tell you the truth, I really cannot stand to see the film myself anymore. It is too much an emotional thing." The man who changed cinema violence couldn't bear to watch his own work because the emotional and psychological weight of creating something so visceral and intense haunted him. In a 1972 Playboy interview, Peckinpah offered perhaps his most brutally honest self-assessment. "I'm looking for a job. I'm a prostitute. I go where I'm kicked, but I'm a very good prostitute." Fact number 19. The editor realized William Holden was playing Sam Peckinpah. Lou Lombardo spent 6 months in Mexico editing the film with Peckinpah, working closely with him every single day, and over that time something became clear to him about William Holden's performance that nobody else had fully articulated. Lombardo observed, "Over time we became the Wild Bunch, because the cast and crew weren't just making a movie about aging outlaws facing obsolescence in a changing world, but living it." And that's when Lombardo recognized what Holden was doing. He was playing Sam. Pike Bishop, the aging leader trying to pull off one last score, stubborn and self-destructive, refusing to adapt to a world that had moved past him, leading his men to their doom out of loyalty and pride. That was Sam Peckinpah, and Holden understood this and channeled the director himself into his performance. Fact number 20. The film's techniques became the foundation of modern action cinema. The legacy of The Wild Bunch extends far beyond just being a great film because it literally created the template for modern action cinema. Director Kathryn Bigelow, who later won the Oscar for The Hurt Locker, wrote that the editing was almost Gestalt editing because it imploded standard theories and was radical and tremendously vibrant. Composer Jerry Fielding's Oscar-nominated score provided the emotional backbone that made the violence feel operatic rather than exploitative. John Woo's entire bullet ballet Hong Kong action style, the slow-motion gunfights, the operatic violence derives directly from Peckinpah's innovations, and Woo has cited The Wild Bunch as his primary influence. The Wachowskis' bullet time effect in The Matrix, which became one of the most copied visual effects of the late 90s and early 2000s, evolved from the multi-speed camera techniques Peckinpah and Lucien Ballard pioneered, and Quentin Tarantino in his book Cinema Speculation called the film perfect after first seeing it at age 11, with its influence visible throughout his entire filmography. From Sam Peckinpah shooting a hole in a wall to demonstrate gunshot sounds, to every modern action director who uses slow-motion violence and rapid editing, the DNA of The Wild Bunch runs through everything. The budget started at $3.5 million and ballooned to $6 million, a 90% overrun, while the shoot was scheduled for 70 days and went 79, putting them 12 days behind schedule. They shot 333,000 feet of film through 1,288 camera setups, and editor Lou Lombardo created 3,643 editorial cuts, more than any Technicolor film ever processed at that time. June 18, 1969 brought the film's opening, and it made $10.5 million domestically and finished as the 17th highest-grossing film of the year. 2 Oscar nominations came for screenplay and Jerry Fielding's musical score, and both losses went to Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. The numbers don't tell the real story, though, because The Wild Bunch changed what was possible in cinema by proving that audiences could handle moral complexity, that heroes didn't need to be heroic, and that violence could be both horrifying and beautiful. Sam Peckinpah, William Holden, Ernest Borgnine, Robert Ryan, Warren Oates, and the rest of the cast and crew went to the Mexican desert and created something that still resonates 55 years later, risking their health, their safety, and their sanity to make a film that the director himself could no longer bear to watch. If you love classic westerns and the stories behind them, make sure to like this video, leave a comment telling us your favorite scene from The Wild Bunch, and subscribe for more deep dives into cinema history. These stories deserve to be remembered. The Wild Bunch walks into Agua Verde knowing they're going to die, but they do it anyway out of loyalty, out of pride, out of the knowledge that some things are worth dying for. Sam Peckinpah and his cast walked into that Mexican desert knowing the production might kill them, and they did it anyway because they knew they were making something that mattered. "Let's go," Pike says. And they went. And cinema was never the same.